let's now have the debate, the global debate. So please, Karen, Thierry, and Stefan, you can begin to, let's say, well, I propose that first you have a brief intervention about what you learned today, something that where you specifically, especially agree or disagree, and or something that you want to add. You had no time to say it during your intervention, and after that we will have kind of open debate, and also for the people who were asking questions, they will be able to speak at the end. But maybe Karen first, and yeah, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, I mean, since I'm just thinking very quickly, the one thing I was really struck with was Agbolade's reference to justice as a fundamental principle of digital autonomy in healthcare, which is a theme that I write about, but I have never used the word. So I think that's really great. I have a lot of thoughts about the last presentation as well, but I think that's the thing that stuck out the most to me.
Thank you, Stefan and Thierry. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yes. No, it was wonderful actually to get the perspectives from the various parts, regions of the world. And I'm actually cooperating, in particular, sort of the talk on Nigeria. I'm cooperating with someone from Nigeria, Leo Ekwe. He is a transhumanist, and he is now based at the University of Cape Town. And we're sort of working on issues actually concerning transhumanism and Africa, and I think it's sort of because of the power which China is getting due to to the large degree also to the collectivized or to the obligatory collection of digital data. They've already got more peer-reviewed papers out per year than the United States, which shows sort of the relevance also of digital data for publication issues. And they are investing a lot in a lot of African countries, which has enormous relevance for the regions in which they are. And I'm particularly intrigued sort of by technology and how it could solve issues concerning global justice as well. So I was particularly happy about that talk. But you know, all the talks were very fascinating. Thank you.
Thierry, I see that you are already discussing about one of these very important questions. That's great.
Indeed. Yeah, we started in the chat. No, I love the idea of data altruism. You give your data to the community because you will be helped afterwards. And so people that are saying, I'm sitting on my data and that's my own and I control, it's fine, but then you're on your own. It's hard to help you in the future. And it's not fair that other people will share the data and help you. So it has to be in both sense. It's a good question also that privacy is not in opposition to health, which is a bad question, but it's definitely the democratic use of data and a good control of the system, and that's not new. I think democracy is about controlling the right of freedom as opposition to the limit of your freedom is when you start to hurting somebody else. And I think this question has been put in the heart of the COVID conversation, that you can be completely free of do whatever, but then you start to be a risk for the others, and that's probably the limit of the definition of freedom. And I think that one big problem with the GDPR and the data protection authorities is that they see privacy as a right which is all alone, while in rights system you always have to balance the different rights. You have your right to privacy compared to the freedom to bear hurting somebody else. There is no absolute freedom. There is no absolute rights. And so we have to use all those rights in a balance. and not privacy as being the only one that can rule over the other rights. And we see that with the right of information, for example, that some people say it's my privacy, but yes, but the society needs some information, for example, to block robbery and phishing and all those other issues. So privacy is immensely important, but it's a balance to make a society work, and we are looking for this balance for the moment. That's why it's so important and interesting to have this conversation here, and also the vision on the world, because on a certain moment Chinese will develop healthcare systems that are so amazing because they are on data, and then we will start depending on those, because if you're sick, you live in a fantastic democratic country in Europe, on a certain moment you're ill, you need to be cured, and only the Chinese will have the solution, and then we are stuck in our democracy. So our democracy has to stay in the game, and we have to promote our culture. That's also why it's so important to succeed with this, and that's why we have to. There's really a burning platform, because we have a better model. Our European model is a better model. It's a more democratic model. It's a more diverse model. It's more culture. Healthcare is cheaper in Europe than it is in for example, US, although it's available for everyone. So cheaper compared to the percentage of GDP. So it's good model, but the model is at risk. Because we are too conservative, because we are afraid of something new. And you see what is happening in Japan. Japan was such an amazing country. When I finished my studies, we thought that Japan would take over the world because all the cars were coming from Japan, robotics were coming from Japan. And now Japan is missing the digital revolution because they are very conservative. And with the elderly population, etc., they are missing the digital revolution. They are missing this healthcare revolution too. So do we want to become the Japan? Or do we want to be heading with a new model, which is definitely more human, but it's more complex, because with democracy you take more time to take decisions. But it should be better to make those balances in Europe and not worse. And therefore, legislation is not always helping in the right direction. The principles are good, but the texts are sometimes not well written.
Yeah. I want to say that John has certainly a point when he's writing, but I also think that we all agree here that the problems of data breaches are non-trivial. But like you say, Thierry, these problems of data breach, they do exist also with private companies, of course. Maybe a question to all of you, but especially to Karen. One of the solutions, maybe more or less close to what John would like, was about the solid projects where each person is kind of a proprietary of his own data. Do you think it's a good system, or do you think it's too complicated, or maybe you have an opinion about this?
I mean, I think we do need to rethink a lot of these issues from the ground up. I mean, I think once you're collecting data, you have to prepare for its exploitation. Like the moment you store and you keep data, you have to be prepared for there to be data breaches, and people will be using it for nefarious purposes. It's just part and parcel, and it's what we know about security, right? When we collect data in our organization, we actually do collect a lot of sensitive data, because when we run our internship program for people who are subject to systemic bias, we ask them to write essays about their systemic bias. So we actually do collect a lot of information, and I really ran a number of threat models and realized that it was not tenable to keep any of that information. So we collect our aggregate statistics and we flush that data as quickly as we can. We don't keep it. And so we have to be really thoughtful about it. And the idea that we're going to, have personal control over encrypted data that is shared through those kinds of mechanisms is a possibility, because, I mean, for all the reasons that have been stated before, I certainly, just for the record, will not be defending the US model on this debate.
Thank you. Other reactions of Stefan or Thierry, and if you don't have things to add, maybe I would propose a more, let's say, informal way to continue, where other people can also ask questions and almost interrupt each other. But calm, still in a quiet way, but let's do it more informal. But maybe Sven and Thierry, if you still want to say something more before we open to others. But maybe not.
Oh, it's open.
Yeah, okay. So it's open, especially to the to the people who were not saying things already, but otherwise, and especially women. So, but otherwise, let's yeah, take the mic. Of course, if I say that, some people will not do it. But okay, please. Gennady, Ilya, Jean, David, I give you the word.
Hello. So thanks for a fascinating discussion. I wasn't entirely convinced by Stefan's argument that we don't need privacy. Now, maybe I misheard, but I am worried that there are possibilities for corporations to do bad things to me, or governments to do bad things to me, or other potential enemies of me to do bad things on account of them having access to data that I would prefer them not to see. It's not that I'm doing bad things, but I'm exposing vulnerable aspects of my personality. So I think maybe in some countries we are in quite a good situation, but in other parts of the world, and increasingly as big corporations are more powerful, there are increasing risks of our innermost behaviors, secret desires, things that we like to explore. We don't want that to be known. And so I think there is a case to be concerned about how our health data is accessed in general. Maybe you'll make a distinction between privacy of general things and privacy of health data. Maybe the privacy of health data is less important, but that's the part I didn't entirely follow. I wonder if any of the panelists want to agree or disagree with that.
David, if I may respond directly to your comment. Actually, I strongly relate to this because I'm absolutely terrified by the suggestions I've been making myself. Sort of because I know once people, whether it is individuals, whether it's institutions, whether it's governments, they have information about you which they could use against you. They will do so for their individual reasons, egoistic motives, just exploitation, just any kind of gain. And that is the greatest risk associated with this suggestion as well. But as a consequence, but that obviously could happen no matter who has the data. Whether it could also happen, I mean, data breach is always possible, but it could happen whenever data is being stored, whether it has a big company or a European government, or it has the Chinese government, or any other kind of institution. So, but the issue is we need the collection of data, and we need big data, and we need personalized big data in order to make the best possible predictions concerning, or find the best possible correlations between genes and diseases, lifestyles, and character traits, and so on. And that's why, so this issue arises just no matter whoever collects the data. And in that case, I would personally say, well, a European government is for me a more trustworthy institution than it's a company or maybe the Chinese government. So it sort of at least cherishes the norms of the Enlightenment, which I subscribe to, in a better way than maybe the other institutions. That doesn't mean it is always guaranteed that the liberal democratic regimes, the governments can change, and we see that happening in European countries as well, and that can be related to challenges. But that doesn't undermine the necessity of collecting the data and having access to the data and using the data for health issues. Which is that's our obligation. We need to fight for that. Such fundamentalists, totalitarians, and so on don't get in that position. That's our obligation as a society to do so. And furthermore, and a further issue is which I want to mention in that respect is there's just one minor issue. I just mentioned that briefly in my short presentation, and that has to do with at the same time we need to make sure, and in that way, I'm rather maybe even libertarian, we need to increase freedom even further, the possibility of actions which deserve to be sanctioned. Only when one person directly harms another person, then we might consider that. But whenever that arises, whenever this is not an issue, people shouldn't be punished. And that has, just one example, what I have in mind, the realm of sexuality, of marriage. If there are three people who, they meanwhile can have a biologically related child, if they want to get married, then they should have the right to get married. And this is like, no one's getting harmed in that respect. If there a lesbian couple and a man who wish to have a biologically related child, they should have the right to do so. And that's what I mean by opening up the realm of freedom much further. And if freedom is opened up much further, the likelihood of fearing sanctions for actions which don't deserve to be sanctions is significantly decreased as well. So what I have in mind, the suggestion is not just giving up privacy, but it goes along with a lot of further issues. Given the current situation, I'm as terrified as you, David, concerning just giving up privacy, because it definitely will be used by people, institutions against.
Sven in the chat makes an excellent point. Says, look what happened in Afghanistan. People trusted the previous Afghan government. They shared information with them, and now all that information's in the hands of the Taliban. People may die as a result. Perhaps it was one of your books, Stefan, you mentioned about the case of the data collection in Holland about the Jewish population ahead of the war. I mean, I can't remember where I read this example, but in Holland, there was a very careful collection of data about ethnic backgrounds. And so long as it was the Dutch government that was looking after it, was fine. But when Holland fell during the Second World War to the Nazi government and all that information fell into the Nazi hand, it expedited the terrible misuse of the Jews. So I think you're right. This is a difficult issue, and it would be wrong to say, hang on, we're not going to share this data, because there are so many big upsides. But we do need to think, how do we ensure that the data is not misused? And we need some trustworthy long-term mechanisms in place to make sure that the data is not used for other purposes. We do in society share data sometimes, and people misuse that, then they are punished. And we need some kind of reliable societal supervision of what the state is doing with it. And it's a multi-layered thing. There are watchers, and then there are watchers of watchers, and ultimately the democrat. In Britain, we have MI5 and MI6, and we have supervision within MI5 and MI6, and ultimately we have Parliament. We have some of the former foreign secretaries and former home secretaries, the distinguished old men and women. They sit in a special committee in the House of Lords to making sure that they're not abusing power. And it's not perfect, but it's in principle how it might work. But I think we need more discussion of this.
The examples concerning sort of the possibilities of abuse are enormous, and sort of just, we can now, who was that, a psychology professor, Princeton, was it Stanford, who sort of found out on the basis of a couple of photos, one can, an AI sufficiently specific, developed specific AI can sort of predict with a high likelihood of sexual orientation of a person, and that seems to work. And it's definitely in specific countries where the sexual orientation matter, that could, have significant consequence on the individual person. That's why, but that's a political issue which arises anyway. That's something we need to take care of as a society, such totalitarian or paternalistic structures don't arise. The further issue is just, even in a liberal, democratic society, of course, whenever humans have access to the data, this is a challenge. And that's why I suggest, so we need to limit any kind of human access, only in specific circumstances that might be granted. And sort of the personalized data which gets collected needs to be processed primarily by algorithms, which has further issues again, but that seems to be an as good as it gets solution if we want to have the advantages and benefits of data collection without the risk of inappropriate sanctions against the individual.
If I may just make a kind of a general, very short, a general remark. I think this debate is very interesting, but actually, I think that most medical data are less sensitive than the data that we are speaking about, yeah, let's say sexual or political IDs. So we live in a strange world, where people don't mind to give their own opinion, and so many things very sensitive on Facebook, Twitter, and so on, but they don't want to let people know what's their blood group, and if they were operated and so on. So for me, but okay, outside of the scope and in the scope, for me there is this strange situation where people are afraid to share things that they share on Facebook. But no, Karen.
Man.
I tend to agree to that.
I see. Well, this is great. Now we have people asking to speak together. So I propose that you use from now, after Karen and after Ilya, that you use the hand, raise your hand. But first Karen and then Ilya.
No, I was just going to say that the only way to keep human access to data is by not keeping it. I know it's very challenging to scrub data while keeping it useful for later audits and further use, and keeping that data essentially useful. But the truth is that it would be naive to say that we could keep data in any mechanisms that we'll be able to keep from human access. So I appreciate what you're saying, but because we cannot anticipate how future use will be, the only safe way is to really limit what is kept and to really thoughtfully scrub data sets.
Okay. Ilya.
Thank you, Didier. I think an important part of the equation is to promote the culture of research, to make it clear to people that actually data is valuable for developing therapies, diagnostics. It is obvious to everybody here, but it is by far not obvious to the general population. And if we increase science education, the culture of research, I think there'll be more willingness to share data. Right now, many people see all the drawbacks in terms of privacy and in terms of what they see as the diminishment of their right, they don't see any benefits. If we explain, if we showcase that it's actually valuable, there may be a change of balance in favor of research.
Yes, thank you. Somebody was speaking and I was stopping him, but it's the moment now. Nobody?
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, just I think you guys are bringing up a lot of good points. Kind of wanted to differentiate between, anonymized data versus data that, is directly tied to your name. I feel like if it's anonymized, you could bypass a lot of these issues. So this is kind of my first comment. Second one would be, kind of alluding to what Karen was saying. I think there is a way to actually store the data in a way that people can't access it, which I know would seem a little strange, but you can actually break the data apart, say using like some form of a blockchain. You have basically an open source mechanism to store the data, and then have some kind of governance around that to then only be able to access it in certain conditions, say for a longevity study. So just a few thoughts.
Thank you. Gennady.
Yes. So I do think in this discussion, it should be possible to arrive at a framework for data sharing that reconciles all of the rights that people consider to exist and to be valuable, provided that the rights are properly defined. So clearly freedom would not mean the right to go around and damage other people or their property, but the right to live the kind of life that one chooses, provided that one doesn't harm anybody else. And the same, I think, can apply vis-a-vis privacy. Now, it may be possible in any system to create a universal opt-in data sharing repository where an individual patient who enters the medical system, whether that be privately or governmentally funded, can provide consent in advance for sharing certain types of medical data. For instance, that person might not mind sharing their blood glucose levels, or that person might not mind sharing the history of a particular procedure, but might be uncomfortable sharing some other datum. And periodically that person might be prompted to reaffirm that consent, or if the situation is a little bit different, that person could be prompted to specify whether or not they agree to the sharing of that particular data element. And that way, you would have a system that is still based on the individual choosing to participate. And then hopefully, as Professor Sorgner stated, there could be other safeguards, algorithms processing most of the data without active human intervention, or some sort of scrubbing, anonymization. I understand those are not perfect, but they can help in terms of alleviating these concerns. I really think for most people, it's the purpose for which they think the data would be used that is most important. So if they think the data would be used to help improve the healthcare system or their own health outcomes, they wouldn't so much mind sharing the information. But if they suspect any sort of ulterior motive, whether that be for marketing to third parties or for the government cracking down on them in other ways they didn't anticipate, that's where they become reluctant. So it would be advisable to eliminate the reasons for that reluctance to the extent possible.
Okay. Thank you, Gennady. If nobody wants to speak, I will ask you. Well, okay. Sorry, I didn't saw your hand, Stefan. So I give the word to myself after you. But actually, for the speakers, you don't have to ask. Especially Thierry and Karen, you don't have to ask. But yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah, what was just said. Exactly. That's what I meant. What a proper democratic usage of the data would be. It's not just taken away. We don't just give it to a big company like Google and Facebook to maximize their financial gains. And we're all doing that without worrying about it. You know, some worry more, the others less. But, you know, in this way, we could directly gain something which, you know, the majority of people cherish enormously. And I've got students coming over from the States who wouldn't have because they've got certain preconditions, they can't afford or they can't get any kind of health insurance. And this is why they're coming here, and here they are covered. That it's such an enormously wonderful achievement, which must not be underestimated. But the challenge is the costs for it are so enormously high. And there are differences. I'm living in Italy, but I know the German system. And I know the German system because there's more money involved. The average salary in Germany is 3,000 euros, and probably about 15% go to the health insurance. The average salary in Italy is 2,000 euros, and only 10% go to the health insurance to the public. That's why the services in Italy, you know, many things they cannot offer in the public service, which the German system can offer. It's a matter of money. Where do we get the money from? The money is needed for having, you know, proper democratic public health insurance system. And here the issue comes in, you know, data is the new oil. And that's, in a way, of course, it's false. Data is not oil because oil is a natural substance, whereas data is an intellectual property, but the function is the same. It's connected to money and power and so on. And I think those who want to suggest, no, the data should not be collected, I think you underestimate the enormous relevance of data collection for anything from scientific research to innovations to policy making. You know, all the realms of the world are now connected, can be improved significantly on the basis of data collection. And that's why if the data was collected in that way, in a way that it is in the interest of you know, the people, it's the payment for the public health insurance, then this would be the most sustainable way of also guaranteeing a well-functioning health insurance, in the same way as promoting the research concerning, you know, improving the health span. And data collection is needed in order to do so. So not collecting the data is just not undermines our most promising option for any kind of progress of expanding the human health span towards 100, 120, 130 years, you know.
Yes, thank you. Thierry, you don't have to ask actually, yeah, because you are one of the speakers, but great. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's not forget that we can do a lot without having that such a personal data. My example for breast cancer, you have just 300,000 completely anonymized pictures, but we had to find them in India. And in India, we could find them immediately, although that it was definitely available in Europe too, but it was too well protected by extremism on privacy. To get a step further, we have to go on more personalized data, but also that can be protected with some technical systems. What we in fact have to be afraid of is populism. Populism is the big risk, as explained for the Netherlands. The problem was not the data. The problem was that the Nazi took the data. And so I think what I'm most afraid of for the moment is not a question of my privacy or not, but it's a rise of populism.
Okay, if nobody wants to speak now, I would like to ask to Gennady. I don't understand why. Well, you know, for people in Belgium and in other countries, when you die, you are presumed to give your organs if it is necessary, and this is changed a lot, because when there is a system of opting out, 90% of the people choose let things go and share their health data in this case. And when you have a system of opting in, it's only maybe 10%. So why do you think that we should have a system of opting in when you know that it's then only to be a small number of people? And by the way, I see a reflection of Karen. So relying on consent means that to be ethical, we have to be able to allow consent to be revoked, which has real logistical challenge. I don't think so. For me, I think that actually the legal situation is that you are not allowed, even in Europe, at least for many cases, you are not allowed, even if you want, to give your informed consent for always. And for me, this is an absurd situation. I mean, if I decide to give you some money, I'm not allowed to change my mind after. If I decide to give data to scientists, I'm allowed to change IDs later. Well, actually, it seems that it's almost nobody is asking that. But okay, that's two questions, reflections specific to health data.
So I can address the question about opting in versus opting out. And with regard to organ donation, this is particularly interesting for life extension advocates and those who are interested in cryonics, because if one is interested in cryonics, one would not want an opt-out system of organ donation. One would rather not take the chance with that system to have one's organs harvested if one would rather have one's body be preserved in as intact a way as possible as part of the cryopreservation process. So I think the benefit of an opt-in system is that it allows every individual to make an informed decision given that individual's own circumstances. And also, I think there should be a burden on those making that proposal to do something with a person's information, to do something with a person's body, to persuade them, to make a compelling case for why this is a good thing, why this would have external benefits. And I'm sure that in the case of organ donation, if someone is not a cryonicist, a more robust public messaging campaign within an opt-in system can accomplish an increased take-up rate. And with regard to the sharing of one's own data, that should probably be a lot easier to get consent for than organ donation, again, if one can convince an individual of the importance of doing that, and that could be done even via the interface. For instance, if somebody has a check mark that they could select for sharing their data, next to the check mark, there could be an explanation. We will use this information for the following purposes, and this may have the following benefits to you and to others. Also, I think with regard to the possibility of revoking consent, if all of these selections are saved within that system, and a person has an account, they could log into the account, they could access their preferences, all of their prior selections, and then deselect anything that they're no longer comfortable with sharing going forward. That could take care of that logistical issue.
Thank you. Karen, you wrote something, but to be totally honest, I'm great. It's great that we don't disagree, but I don't understand exactly what you. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about logistic aspects.
Oh yeah, no problem. I mean, I only was mentioning it in the chat because I didn't want to derail this other conversation, and it's sort of a side point. But the point is that a lot of entities are finding that having the ability to truly delete data from their systems, there are serious logistical hurdles, and so many organizations are keeping less data for that reason. We're one of those organizations, and I think that's a really positive movement to use the data, anonymize it where possible, and create data sets that are available for folks to use that are anonymized. You know, I think like you've got the balancing of interests, like what's your legitimate interest versus keeping the data. No matter how you cut it, if you're allowing people to opt out and you have data sets that are distributed, it's just going to be a huge logistical hurdle if you want to do it ethically and allow people to have a say. People change their minds, they're educated, there are a whole host of reasons. It's just, you know, I'm a natural optimist, but as a lawyer, I'm a trained pessimist. And so we have to imagine all of the ways in which this can go awry, whether it's from regime changes from governments that have already been mentioned before, corporate takeovers, changes in general understandings about mores. It's tough to know what those changes are, and the only way we can anticipate to keep any individual's data and privacy secure is by keeping less of it.
Yeah, frankly, on one side, I understand you, Karen, David, and others. On the other side, I think, well, health data like I don't know, blood pressure, blood group, and most of health data who can be useful for longevity, they are less sensitive than political opinions, sexual preferences, and so on. So yeah, that's kind of and at the moment, it's more complicated to exchange health data with scientists than to exchange political opinions with people you don't like. So it's that for me, the kind of, and I'm a little bit afraid that, yeah, in this discussion is great, but we are doing a little bit like if this health data was more sensitive than other data, and once again, in most cases, it's not the case. But maybe some reactions about that, especially from Ilya or from others. No. Okay, so
I can react on that. That's why I'm saying people will share the data. And the question is, people, when they become sick, they don't act reasonably anymore. So they cannot make a right choice if a medicine would be a good medicine or not, if it's available somewhere. So people will share the data. People will share the medical data. We have to make sure that it's done in a democratic and reasonable way to protect also the individuals. And indeed, they share their opinion on Facebook, which is far more dangerous. If in Afghanistan, the Taliban will look at social media to put people in jail, not at the medical data. They don't care about the medical data. So there is a lot of education towards the people to what is data and why they have to share or not, and definitely at a younger age to avoid disasters on social media when they grow up. And we have to be aware that people will share the data, and so we have to make sure that that's happening in a good way and it's useful to an European ecosystem to develop our democracies.
Okay,
Just
so
to- maybe-
it's now 9:40 p.m. in Belgium. It's very late in other
Okay.
parts where people are. I propose now to give the floor only to non-speakers who were not speaking until now, if they want. And after that, I give the floor to Stefan, Thierry, and Karen in this order for a last comment, and then Ilya and I are going to make a very brief conclusion. And maybe before, I also want you to take a look again to the sentence who was written. I put it in the chat again. And if you have some other comment not already made, let us know. Yeah, that's it. But first, people who were not speaking yet, if they want, like Jean, Angel, and others, it's now or never. Don't forget to unmute yourself, of course. Otherwise, no. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So the final word, sorry, first Stefan, Thierry, and Karen.
I just to mention that, you know, I share the worries mentioned by David, by Karen. I'm terrified, but the advantages which go along with it are so strong, and the relevance of data collection is so enormously important. The relevance is so high that we, for several reasons, have no. I think we are forced to do it, no matter whether we want it or not, actually. And so in a way, in an obligatory manner. And I mean, obviously, one additional advantage is also, I mean, if we don't only have, I mean, here it was mentioned that a limited data set might be limited to finding out, to finding a sufficient amount of correlations. But the more data we have, the more reliable it is also to finding the really rare cases, to being fully covered, firstly. Secondly, there is the option of predictive maintenance. And predictive maintenance so far has been applied to, and this is what I'm having in mind, predictive maintenance so far has been applied to machines. So if sensors are being used to an engine of a plane, and if you discover certain values, you know that the engine is likely to become dysfunctional within the next half a year. So you can change a fully functioning part, which makes the plane safe, but to guarantee that there's not at all even a risk of it becoming dysfunctional. And so by having sensors within our bodies, RFID chips in our bodies, we can do the predictive maintenance of human health, which again would increase the human health span significantly. And that has an enormous amount of implications. And the third issue is just a economic one, a financial one, which we're currently in a war for digital data. And the Chinese, I mean, the internet is no longer a global institution. In China, YouTube and Facebook, they don't have the possibility to access data in China. There is not only the Chinese wall, but also the Chinese firewall, which protects the data. But the Chinese companies have the possibility to having access to the data within China and outside of China, which provides them with a comprehensive data set, which enables them to becoming enormous, in an incredible manner, economically powerful. And so if we don't collect the data, if we undermine the possibility of data collection in Europe, as we do, that has the consequence of Europe going down economically in an enormous manner, which means it will first tackle the middle class. The middle class getting worse off, that will lead to tensions within society. the middle class, they will look for scapegoats, which are the minority recruits, the immigrants, asylum seekers. That will lead to civil war in Europe. You know, this is what I'm talking about. It has enormous amount further implications. We couldn't uphold the living standards. No public health insurance would be possible, and so on and so on. And the only reason why the US, Americans and Chinese would come here is because of, you know, of the pizza and pasta and the nice, you know, and the Eiffel Tower. And so it has much further relevance to thinking about the need to rethink the meaning of data collection. And expanding the human health span is one, and the democratic usage to pay for a public health insurance is another one. But there are many other options, many other consequences which also need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you, Stefan. There is a question of David asking you to develop, but I propose that you develop in the chat, because otherwise. Now, Thierry.
Yeah, I very much agree with Stefan. But data is not at the center. Data is a tool to solve issue, and it's not a question of gathering as much data as possible. At Google, for example, we have too many data. We really want to reduce data. You can see that with smaller data sets and with AI, you can do amazing things with smaller data sets, but you have to be able to do so. Certainly, we have sometimes the wrong lens. If we look at this problem, being a very poor African or a very poor Chinese, you are doing everything you can to be in a better health. And I think that's also our benefits, because if we can increase the health all over the world, it's the best way to limit overpopulation, because as you know, when you limit the childbirth, then the population is stabilizing or even decreasing, like in Europe. So it's a key element towards sustainability of our planet. It's not just the health of our rich European or Americans. It's a question first to make that available to everyone on the planet, and therefore it's also an altruistic issue, because then we save our lives too. And third, I think you can have more control mechanism. And once again, it's not a control like a Nazi control. It's to control that is not controlled are there, but we have to start collaborating better and having the right conversation fast, because we are losing so much time in Europe, although we have so much talents and amazing things that we want to definitely develop.
Thank you, Thierry. And now the last word to Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I think just listening to a lot of this conversation, it's really easy and dangerous to oversimplify the issues that are represented here. I think that we all recognize that there is a real balancing of interests in each of these topics that we're discussing. I think in particular, with respect to balancing privacy and data collection, we need to think deeply about thoughtful data collection and retention. There's no two ways about it. And I think we've been focusing so much on the discussion about collecting data and retaining data. We haven't really talked about the algorithms that are analyzing this data, and that we really should be thinking about making sure that our algorithms are shared, that they're testable, that we're not relying on any black boxes for our long term. And I would echo what Thierry said, which is we need to have more conversations, not less. This is I really applaud you all for hosting this. Thank you so much. I think we simply just need to be more coordinated and push for more discussion. As someone coming from the United States, if we could have a lot more thoughtful, in-depth conversation, I think that we would be in a much better situation. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Karen. This is so the end of this conference. I will give the word to Ilya for a few last words, and then I will give myself the word for a few last words. Yes, Ilya.
Well, I fully agree with Karen. I think the best decision we can now make is to decide to have more discussion to make a better decision. So we're really a question of snowballing this discussion to get more people involved in the conversation, education, in promotion of science, of research culture. So this way, I hope we will spread, because right now we're about 20 people, and we need more people in this discussion. So that's the word. Let's continue. Let's keep this outreach going.
Yeah, and Ilya, in a few weeks there will be the month of what we call the month of longevity, October. You know, somebody was speaking at the about the WHO. The WHO is organizing events from the decade of healthy aging, but sadly not speaking only a little bit about the progress of let's say research for longevity. But the theme of this year for the International Day of Older People, what we call the International Day of Longevity, is all aspects related to digital life, digital questions, and old people. Also, as a conclusion of today, many things were said about really the first theme of this conference. I think that we all agree that big data is quite useful for longevity research. That probably non-longevity research absolutely need AI to progress. That the one of the ways to share more health data is to promote data donation with this question of opting in, opting out, but still to have more science. To give more scientific information to citizens who want to share their health data in a way to encourage this. I still think, but I heard many things, and we will study that still later. But that the sentence that you had on the website to contribute to creating a system that is trusted by citizens, managed by a public institution or an NGO, where there is an opting out and by default the health data, but anonymized or pseudonymized, can be used for scientific research, is the best way to work. But there are many discussions on this. I think that Europe is one of the best places where we can progress. I think that Europe is a place where there is a big discussions on artificial intelligence and there are also discussions concerning this concept of data altruism is a good place to start. But of course, the United States, China, and other places are advancing fast, and they have many scientists using data there also. And the technical point is this conference will be online thanks to Mario and to Virginie in a few days. Thank you very much for being there so long, and please do not let's continue to share with the people here, and maybe I hope for next meeting with among other people from the European Commission. I had this morning a very interesting discussion about the sentence that's on the website about by the goal of by 2025 to share health data for European citizens. Thank you all. I now stop the